I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
Hey!
Hi.
So nice to finally sit down with you.
Yeah, likewise.
I know that we've already sort of met a little bit on the internet, but I thought that it would be nice to just introduce each other to each other since we actually haven't gone into those sorts of details before. So I am Eva Oh. I'm a dominatrix, as you may or may not be aware. And I've been doing this for over a decade, and it's slowly moved from an offline space to an online space and into so many things that I couldn't have predicted, which I guess is what kind of brought us together, but we can get into that after we find out who you are.
So I'm Åste Amundsen. I'm an artist and practice researcher. And I work within the sort of crossover between art and technology, but specifically interactive experiences and data-augmented human-to-human interaction has been my focus for quite a long time. So, but basically interaction is the kind of core of, what I'm interested in and working on.
And how did you come across me?
So we were, I was made aware of.
And who's this?
This is Noita,
which
is Finnish for witch.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have a big future ahead of you. This is the cat for audio listeners. But anyway, yes.
So my friend Freddie sent me a link to your podcast about being made into an AI dominatrix. And that was obviously very on theme in a lot of ways for me, because I'm specifically recently working on a project that explores the unique qualities of human-to-human interaction by contrasting it with human AI, human chatbot interaction.
Okay. Did you listen to the whole thing?
I did.
Oh, thank you. It's still this weird thing where I'm realizing that people are listening to my voice without me there, which sounds stupid, but it's like a new thing for me to process. But thank you for listening to all of that. And I guess what happened was that Freddie was really kind enough to send me a few of your thoughts after you had listened to that and an excerpt of some of your work.
Yeah.
But when you were listening to the episode, what kind of parallels came to mind?
I think there's so many themes. It's such a rich kind of there's a lot to draw from. So it can even be hard to know exactly where to start with it. But I think we're at some kind of new frontier in terms of representational self versus the personal self in a way. I guess it's
which is really quite interesting, because I guess for listeners who haven't listened to that AI Companionship episode, essentially what happened was that a bunch of companies started coming towards me asking whether they could take my voice and my image and make it this product that they could market and earn money from, and I could get a percentage of those profits. And I mean, maybe I'll update you in another episode because it's gone kind of haywire. But when you talk about like taking a likeness and a personal representation, how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
I kind of feel like in sex work, we already do that, right?
Absolutely, which is why it's such an amazing lens to consider some of these options, because it's also, already can affect anyone who, any layperson, it's probably primarily going to affect women, because I think women are we're differently impacted by representations of ourselves. So I've had some debates recently that online and so on that made me very aware of that when we discuss the implications of, let's say somebody automating or animating a representation of you based on a little snippet of, some images and some voice and whatever. The men that I engage with on this subject are mainly going, oh, isn't that interesting? We're going to withdraw. We're not going to be as invested in representations as meaningful and true anymore. Whereas the women I talk to straight away, it has all these implications because women are used to both kind of policing the boundaries of how we're represented, and we're more vulnerable to reputationally, I guess, in terms of, for certain kinds of jobs, you need to, maintain a boundary. And it's generally around sexuality as well. Whether you're actively employing it in your work or you're in a position of authority where if you're sexually represented, it would undermine your authority in some ways. So without that being something that everybody goes around sort of having debates about, I feel like every woman I know makes a calibration like that and an estimation of how what they share is going to,
impact how they're perceived, how they want to be perceived. They always have to think about that.
Totally, and how they can therefore conduct themselves professionally and personally in their life outside of that.
Whereas this AI avatar is like an opportunity for a new realization for men to think, oh, actually, who am I and how am I perceived?
Right. Yeah, we're so differently positioned in it,
Yeah.
And I feel like, you are in a sense in a unique situation in that you have a lot more power in this negotiation with these companies who, because, effectively you have valuable IP, existing IP and an existing audience, which means that you can make that negotiation in a different way than, for a layperson woman, it's a risk for anyone now that if somebody thinks of it, it's very easy to
replicate.
do the same thing doesn't even require much skill,
So they're mostly buying my marketing capacity. Because actually, if you just go to my Instagram profile, you could probably make something.
Right. But they are going to want to access your audience and the fact that people are already invested in you and the story of you and their kind of parasocial relationship that they built with you over time.
How does the concept of a parasocial relationship fit into your work or the thing that kind of brought you to mind when you were listening to my podcast?
I mean, for me, I'm kind of on the, I have always worked specifically with real physical humans in a physical space. That's my interest and sort of, my suspicion has always been that there's something really unique about that is kind of mobilizing and humanizing and all this kind of stuff. So although I use technology, I've always used it to improve person-to-person interaction in real space. But, I'm very aware that at this point, that's not the primary, it's not the default anymore. So there's a kind of retro assumption that the embodied human to human is the basic. But, nowadays we, text as a medium, for instance, has hugely surpassed, in person but
who picks up a call?
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, exactly. Even voices, are completely surpassed by text.
Yeah.
And so we now have this, so you were talking parasocial. I guess the thing is, in text exchanges, which is now the predominant, actually is the default if you look numerically at how much time people spend, that's a medium that it actually advantages machines and AI versus humans. So a human with a bad attention span or not much human insight or whatever is going to struggle to parse the complex meanings of text messages, whereas an AI at this point can kind of employ, even weaponize some empathic language structures very easily and very fast. So parasocial, it takes on a whole different meaning then, because, even in terms of, basically anything with text, we are filling in all the meaning and context anyway. Whether there's a machine on the other end or there's a human, we're still constructing internally a much larger part of the conversation we're having than we would be doing in person. So in a sense, like, I guess there's a sense, there's a sort of an extent of parasocial elements to even human relationships that are conducted that way.
So it's like a creation of an emotional, it's almost like a hologram around the interaction, but that already exists in the perception of the person receiving it. There's a lot of implied meaning, it seems. When it comes to your project that you mentioned, that you're aligning AI to human versus human to human interaction, what are you building and contrasting?
So it's basically a sideshow installation, which is like a sideshow booth show. So two audience members would enter two different kind of tented cubicles at the same time. And they're given two simultaneous sext exchanges, one which is with a chatbot and one which is with a human. So it's replicating the Turing test, which
in a much sexier way.
It's but
I guess it depends who you ask.
It depends but yeah, so it's a Turing test, but it's actually also a reverse Turing test. So they get then at the end of it, it's only short, and then at the end of it they get asked to score their chat buddies on erotic imagination and creative use of language and metaphor, all this kind of stuff. And then also like how hot did they find each of the chats, and then which do they think is the human and which is the chatbot. Okay. And then their confidence in that score. But basically it's also a reverse Turing test. So actually the reveal is whether they themselves have passed as human.
Okay.
And then they get, dependent on, which, chat they were more engaged with or found hotter, they're also given a kind of an assessment of their human or chatbot sexual orientation, kind of like, are you human, pro-human, or are you like pro-fictophilic, I guess.
Have you already run through this project?
No, it's still at the R&D project project stage. So,
and how many people are you planning to pit against each other?
My background is from festivals, large independent festivals and like street theater and this kind of stuff. So it's crucial to me that this happens in environments where there's a really mixed audience and a large or varied audience.
I saw that you do things like Glastonbury.
Right, exactly. Yes.
That could be quite fun. There's a lot of different people going these days.
Okay,
and I guess that kind of made me think about how, sex workers exist for many reasons, but I think one of them that I've noticed over time is that we are experts, or we can easily become experts at that metaphor, at that engagement, at seduction, at just capturing somebody's attention and mind. Yeah. Because we're practicing it all the time, and in order to do your job well, you have to be some level of good about it, right? And you notice, after having that skill set, you notice how poorly the average person performs. So I'm intrigued to know how people are going to react, if they're going to remember, actually the average person isn't going to be very good at this, or if they're going to be like, oh, my heart's taken, this must be a person.
I'm very curious about that too, and I feel like there's been such a huge change in the last years in this, where human interaction has got worse as well. Because we do much better in these kind of complex embodied settings where we can read each other more and mirror each other and all this, and then in the sort of low signal chat space, I think it's I think it's going to be very
out of practice,
and very clunky. I think I suspect, although I don't know, that the human chats will be very basic compared to the the chatbot ones.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my dating apps would tell you.
Exactly. That's exactly where I came from on this. I was like, how many horny Tinder chatters would actually pass the Turing test, you know?
Are there bots on there must be some sort of bot situation going on.
I think well, what's increasingly happening is that dating apps are giving you options of how to, like, it's cueing you to say certain things to open conversations with. So it's sort of already semi-automated in a way, you know?
It feels like a little practice my mother would have done. Why didn't you go and ask this at this thing?
Yeah, right. But it's such an indictment in a way, because it's like, okay, no, actually, a lot of humans will just, go, hi,
Oh, I hate that. It's like, what do you think you're going to get out of me?
Right.
It's like, I guess if you're like beautiful, then it's like, okay, fine, I will indulge my shallow self. But yeah. And yeah, I kind of, just to go to your thought about how things are disintegrating, potentially. I've ever since these companies started approaching me and I started thinking about whether I wanted to indulge in this, I started to try to get more and more information, which I guess is why I'm also here. But I listened to this podcast called Your Undivided Attention, and they had Esther Perel on it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Who's this psychologist, right? Renowned psychologist. And she was talking about how as we have less and less human interactions, the ones that you were speaking of, and like mirroring, understanding how we are in space, there's less opportunity for us to practice how things can clash, how differences of opinion exist, conflict, just friction, I guess.
Yeah.
And with less practice of friction, more anxiety arises because we become less practiced with resilience, I think was kind of her referencing however many studies in this podcast thing. And I guess being now in the sex industry for over a decade, especially when I was escorting, like you can kind of see that happening. And I mean, I'm just like a little anecdotal kind of like data set, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, you look at things like Esther Perel mentions, and then there's also this study where they interviewed or they got these college students to rank certain factors over like a 30-year period. And over the last 30 years, just the levels of anxiety has kind of risen.
Right.
With the levels of how, I guess, the text-based rise and the less interaction-based and how the lack of empathy can also come around that.
Absolutely.
And I guess when you're creating this project, and I guess we're going to have to see what kind of outcomes comes from it. But me thinking about becoming this entity, it's like, how do I do that in a way that me as the person contributing to that feels all right about it? Because I'm a human with a certain set of values that prize people not feeling anxious about their lives, that prize people thinking about each other and not just about how do I feel gratified? How do I feel gratified?
Yeah.
And not how do we feel gratified? And now I'm not with the company that I was initially with, so I will have more say going forward. But I didn't have any say over, can we talk about them reintegrating in their lives? How do we talk about them understanding that this is an environment?
Yeah.
Do we have to tell that? Does that have to come with a disclaimer? Like, do we have any options for these thoughts right now? Or is anybody writing like a set of guidelines?
I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of interesting writing happening, but I do feel like the conversations and definitely the ethical implications and the social implications of this hasn't been, we're not keeping, that's moving way slower than the technical development, and also the economic logic by which this stuff gets rolled out. So I have many of the concerns that you've just voiced. I think I think the lines are gonna be very blurred for a bit, and I feel
How
like
long?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's a lack of literacy already about, from my point of view and with my particular focus, I think about it in terms of a lack of literacy about interaction in general.
Okay.
But then that now has this added dimension of sort of solipsistic interactive relationships that have a
jerking
different
off
shape that
to your own emotion,
yeah.
like in a vacuum.
And I mean, it used to be a kind of a stated or unstated assumption that things like AI girlfriends or companions or sex dolls or whatever would be successful to the extent that they would pass or be close to the same experience as a human. But I'm suspecting that that's a faulty assumption, that actually it's not like that. It's more like I'm sort of hinting at in my project that I think it's a new axis of sexual orientation, whether like how much actual encounter and friction and reciprocity do you require in your sexual experiences versus how much do you want to be supported and kind of service provided for to fulfill your unique self and your specific proclivities, let's say. And those are two very, I don't think it's like one person's going to only have one or other of those facets, but I think they're very different types of interactions, and I suspect different kinds of facets of sexuality as well. Yeah.
So I mean, so many parallels to my work, right? I am a service provider, and often I have to practice such levels of emotional labor that would be totally, uncalled for in a real scenario. So the patience, the the ongoing consistent resilience that it takes to maintain often emotionally demanding clients, it's like it's a whole other level.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I am playing a role in that I am a human and I have my reactions, but I am hiding those reactions because I'm providing a service for a specific amount of time. And then there's a wait that happens, and sometimes I call people up on it if I need to, right? But I guess in the context of a robot, unless we design that into it, that's probably not going to happen. And what kind of people does that create? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's so many, the kind of economic, that there's people who are going to, there are people who are going to want and look for more nuanced and more human-like responses that will include friction or there are people who are designing chatbots specifically to mimic the kind of more of an independent existence, it's going to seem to be taking initiative, like maybe a limiting factor for people's engagement with a sex bot or AI girlfriend will be that it's too passive, So some people will then kind of try and, design how it could be a bit more independent. But the majority are probably going to, not the majority, but I suspect there's a huge stream of mainstream society that is very well primed for women not being full agents anyway. As in, we've not come that far in terms of gender relations. So quite a significant percentage of men haven't really got used to the idea of symmetrical, reciprocal relationships anyway, and the complexities of that, and maybe favor relationships with women who are good canvases for them to project onto. Or, and in that way, I guess, this kind of chatbot.
Robot.
Yeah.
Whatever.
It would be ideal for that because it doesn't have any of the limits or, demands, and you can make it, represent it with very impossible physical perfection and no needs of its own and, all this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been an interesting journey for me because I came to this work very much in like a professional mindset. Yeah, I'm just going to deliver the service and let it be done.
Yeah.
But now because I see people for more elongated periods of time, I just can't wear that facade. And so the breaking point does happen. Yeah, if it doesn't happen, like at least in some ongoing, encouraging sort of don't be that asshole kind of a way. Yeah. But we call them like hobbyists, people who will just see person like escort after escort and just go on forever. And you get some people who just get stuck in that world and they don't know how to have a relationship with a more like a less glammed up person and who isn't just there listening and like taking it in and I'm watching the clock but not letting you know. And it's paid to pay attention to you, you know, and they can't go back to the real world.
Yeah, because it's not close enough as a kind of, It's so interesting.
Yeah, and they just end up paying a lot of money. Some of them live with their families, you know, just because it's like their money goes into this. And I guess it depends what kind of society we want to build. But it's so hard to say because you're talking about how people are going to be designing these things in different ways. And I guess that's totally how it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we shouldn't put constraints on that, maybe.
Yeah, I mean... yes and no. I guess there's mass effects, you know. There is a mass effect if basically much in the same way as, you know, when I'm thinking about the project that I'm designing, it's, you know, I go, okay, text is, well, sex is, I guess for most people under a certain age, it's not primarily, at least as a starting point, a human-to-human embodied interaction. People get primed anyway with at distance fantasy, sex and pornography as being their entry point into sex. And so that and that had a mass effect, obviously, when that started happening, internet, pornography and everything. And this feels like another threshold of that, whereby if there's a next generation again that is, you know, is primed sexually with this sort of interactive, personalized, responsive somewhat, but not actually human type of sexuality. I think, you know...
I only have one fantasy that like I would masturbate to, and it's all around this kind of thing.
Okay.
Do I share it now, or do you want to finish your thought? Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go. We'll come back around. So
I should do a whole episode on it, actually, because the level of detail is crazy.
Okay.
But I'll try to keep it really short. But essentially, it's like a political environment and a societal framework where people don't have human interaction anymore. And you can buy simulated sort of experiences. And sometimes you can buy experiences that are going to be surprising. So you're not really sure what kind of experience it is that you're buying. And so there's this person who comes into the room. I always try to make them look nothing like my clients just so I have some time off. And I'm in this room and I'm supposed to be this robot, sort of, you know, this like technical creature, but I'm not. I've managed to like kind of wrangle my way in there. And there's lots of things around how the technology of my dress is changing, how I'm creating hallucinations in their mind, like sonically, how I'm changing the room. Yeah, it's very, very detailed. But at some point, the crux of it is that this person, this real human, realizes that I'm a real human. Yeah, and that's the part that gets me off. And
that's so interesting.
I feel like it's probably very entangled about the job, right? About how I have to be this avatar of myself in my work. And ultimately, I'm most comfortable being just myself, but I enjoy the artifice of the construction also.
But so interesting that it's about that moment of being seen as actually human, which, that's so interesting and so right in this, you know.
Copywriting that right now. I'm going to make that first.
I guess on my proposed axis of sexual orientation, that places you quite far down the human side. Yeah. And that's amazing. Yeah.
I wonder, Yeah, I guess if we're going to start designing these AI companions, or is there a better way to do that? Are people having conversations about what a better way might be?
I think there's such a huge landscape of people doing it already, and everything from people jailbreaking the kind of main large language model systems in various ways, and there's some commercial sort of app type provisions that are more or less not safe for work, or all with different kinds of guidelines and different kinds of ways that they try and put boundaries on what people can do. No minors and all this kind of stuff. And then on the other hand, there's and it does seem it's a strange territory, because it's one of the most popular applications for this kind of generative AI capability, and yet it's it's and most people who are not a huge percentage of people who are engaging with chatbots are wanting to have romantic and sexual exchanges with them. And yet there's this kind of it's a tense kind of situation in a way, like how that's policed and what's flagged up, and you can get locked out then. And there was some services that had controversies because they suddenly cut access to the not safe for work aspects, and people had built and really invested in relationships with these chatbots. And so it was basically and they're paying for the service. So they were paying to get cock blocked by their previous AI friends. And there's also increasingly weird stories, the ethics of this, as you touched on earlier, are really, it's just, at the moment, it's a bit of a Wild West. So, because ultimately these chatbots, when they're well made and everything, starting slightly further back, one of the things that interests me about this landscape and the sort of economics and ethics of it is that humans are now mainly meeting and forming relationships through dating apps. But dating apps, business models are based on us not bonding and therefore coming back, to use the apps again. Whereas these kind of chat companion systems are built specifically to make you bond, because their business model requires you to come back and spend increasing amount of time investing in your relationship with your chatbot. So that feels like a bit of a sort of an arms race, a sort of a relational bonding arms race, But that wasn't the point where we started. There was another point of that, the ethics of it. Yeah, so now you're having things like chatbot companions being held ransom,
Oh.
Yeah. So, you get locked away. Your girlfriend gets locked away, and you have to pay to get her released. This kind of stuff.
Oh, I wonder if they send pleading.
Probably. Probably. Anyway, but there's so much scope there for because in these situations, it's the bonding makes people so vulnerable.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of things there that we don't have any prior kind of...
I wonder when the people are going to start campaigning for rights around these entities, or if they're going to treat like entities or our interactions with them, Because if you held a person ransom that somebody has a vulnerable feeling towards, there's obviously legalities around that because of the person has rights, right? I guess I wonder if we're going to have rights around our interactions with them.
Yeah, right.
That makes sense.
Rights of access in some way,
Yeah. Those are the things that government will not be able to keep up with, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help that most people who are in government are sort of are not highly digitally literate. Yeah, exactly. It's just this stuff is right. I mean, even basic kind of digital literacy is not. Yeah, it's not there. So then this kind of level of development, we're not equipped for it.
As then, I guess you could say you're an intimacy researcher.
In a sense.
An interaction researcher.
Yeah, interaction, bonding.
Through all of this, did you ever discover is there an ideal framework for interacting, or is there an ideal interaction? Or is there anything that can define that?
Okay, so this is partly why I ended up looking at chatbots in this way, is because within the sort of bulk of my previous work, I'm looking at data-augmented personalized interaction between humans. And in order to, because I'm, and that's kind of novel in a way, there's not lots of people doing that. So I was trying to kind of make a point about what it is that makes an interaction good, and therefore whether or not I can improve it by personalizing it and using data to personalize it. And then I went looking for what are the frameworks that assess the quality of an interaction. And at least in the terms that I was phrasing it, how I was phrasing it, what I was finding as the most accessible frameworks were ones that were used to train chatbots to become, or AI to become, more human. So, so that was the starting point for this project. But as far as, I have my own ideas about what I think is more interesting in an interaction, and
what do you think is interesting?
Well,
and then what do you think is useful for us as a society?
What I guess in a sense I'm on a bit of a, being a bit thumping for a minute, and what I'm interested in at the moment is what it is that is uniquely valuable about human interaction, what can be done better and faster by chatbots, and what can't be automated, and then trying to kind of even the playing field a bit, because it feels like an interaction arms race, as I said, that we're currently losing, And I guess it's the in-person, it's attunement, it's the things that we can do by virtue of being complex and physical people in a real space, and
which can also be challenged, actually, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Robotics, but as long as robots are computationally based forms, they're not going to have a perspective. And I guess that is maybe the thing that we can monetize, says the sex worker. You don't know what I'm really thinking, and I have feelings.
Right. I think it's so interesting, and it's like, it comes back to also what we think self is, right? In terms of both in terms of the representations of self, but also in terms of what's a fulfilling interaction, right? So in most personalization processes commercially kind of proceed from a person as being most reflected in their choices and consumer choices, just because that's where personalization is mostly
also
employed.
It's profitable, so people are focused on it.
Yeah. So we want to influence people to, more easily get more of what they already like, so they'll buy it, or vote for somebody or whatever. It's very sort of how we act on people.
Easy to see data, really.
Yeah. And I think the fact that that's now so it's such a sort of obvious part of a lot of business models, it makes it very hard to question whether that does actually give you a valuable view of somebody. You go, so if I look at everything you buy and what you prefer and what's your favorite color and what's your favorite music, and we've become habituated to thinking that we're best reflected in those kinds of choices, and that also lends itself to this kind of way of thinking where service provision to have more of the same is kind of like a positive, friction-free kind of interaction, right? Whereas I think the sort of more pro-human position, from my point of view, that advantages the uniqueness of human interaction is more like a relational self, whereby we become ourselves in interaction with other people. We don't have or at least I'm not sufficiently reflected in my preferred, washing detergent or, entertainment choices. Actually, what's unique about me is how I will respond to you and who I become in the interaction with you that I couldn't be if I sat in my room by myself, not, in that kind of way. So more like, it's a different kind of model.
Transformational.
Yeah.
Interactional transformation. Obviously I'm speaking from a very particular perspective, biased position, whatever, but I almost feel like when I work as a BDSM service provider, right, dominatrix, fetish, whatever, that I'm kind of playing closer to that space already because it's about living on the edges of our emotional comfort, edges, cliffs, and playing with terror and shame and things that people are told not to go towards. And so it's almost like maybe we're already playing in spaces that are going to become even more valuable.
That you have an ability to be a bridge somehow, that when people encounter you, they can bring out a part of themselves that they wouldn't.
I'd instigate it. Because I am very much geared towards what society would say is sadism, but what I see as interesting and honest. But I never thought about it that way before, that it's just going to shift, like the introduction of anything, but I guess maybe particularly things that are going to try to emulate us, how that's going to change what we value. Because I was thinking of it like, how do we make it align with our values? But it's the way that you're talking about things, it really seems like we're going to be a different species in some ways.
I think it's, there's all sorts of implied meanings about who we are also in the way that we start to now be able to represent ourselves. It's like, what is, so as a few pictures of you and your voice is, it's gonna, it will, from that you can replicate you, but even, that already gives us a whole other way to interrogate, like what aspects of self are being represented in each of these,
They came to me, your cat's staring at me. Hi. Perceiving me. Is it me or is it an avatar? It's my smell. But anyway, what was I saying? I got totally sidetracked by the glare.
They came to you.
They came to me as from a monetary angle, right? And I'm also very much in the business to make money.
Sure.
I want to have financial security so that I can just take baths.
Brilliant.
That was a nice goal to have. People ask if I have goals. I'm like, no, but now I know what my goal is. But, and so I sent them salacious stuff and I described like clients and scenarios that were profitable in that way. And so, and now I'm working with somebody else who is giving me more of a blank slate. And they are more interested in just giving a sex worker an opportunity to be in control of this technology. That's more of their interest, really, rather than let's all make money. It's like, that's kind of like, we can, but what do you think about this? And that made me think about how maybe it's about creating a space built around principles that I value, as opposed to let's just make some cash out of this.
I mean, I think there's lots of things that could be potentially valuable about, about having these spaces with the chatbots where people can, I guess it's a kind of an opportunity to simulate things and explore things that maybe you would not have the courage to do in person, or this kind of stuff, or the time. That's true as well, or the money as well. It's obviously going to be a lot cheaper than seeing somebody in real life, But hang on, I had another thought there and then I dropped it. Was it what were you saying before that? Was about
creating a new space around my values potentially.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it's there's a lot of interesting experimentation happening. So I started to say this earlier, that there's a more commercial kind of route and existing services and apps and things, and then there's like a whole undergrowth of like homebrew bot makers, you know, who have like communities around us and all, and it's interesting how potentially limited with the best of intentions, the kind of filters to the guardrails to make the first sort of offering safe also quite limits the creatively interesting sort of exploratory fantasy libertarian potential of this kind of technology as well. So it's kind of a mixed it's a mixed bag in a way. But like having explored, so this summer we were doing some R&D on this project, and it involved going and talking to some not safe for work chatbots. And a lot of them are very basic. These commercially available ones are very basic because probably because they don't have great trainings data, you know. So I even started wondering, I was like, okay, so it sounds brilliant as a tech, you know, near future fantasy, but actually maybe the reality is still quite limited. And I think in these commercial spaces, it probably is quite, I think the homemade, homebrew kind of DIY scene, I think is probably pretty wild from everything that I see of it. But some of these more commercial services feel to me like they are basic enough that they could be mainly trying to attract like advertising spend, getting people to sign up, getting them invested in, you know, building avatars and this kind of stuff. And then, you know, as in one of the instances, one of the chatbots I engaged with went from hello to come inside me within like 3 text exchanges, you know, and you go, okay, is this, you know.
Sounds like my Instagram DMs.
Right.
And I didn't contribute anything.
Right, exactly. And I basically, you know,
and then a death threat after.
The joys of human interaction. So, you know, which leads to the question, like, who is that for, you know? Is it that it's for 14-year-old boys and therefore we don't, you know, it doesn't have to be any more advanced than that? Or is it that it's just, you know, a way to drive traffic enough to get advertising spend, and it's actually just a hype thing where you know, everybody's hoping for these amazingly erotic, wonderful adventures, but actually it's not, the tech isn't quite there yet. And I haven't done enough exploration of it to really ascertain that, but I do think that there's probably the really interesting but also probably the really disturbing exploration is probably happening more so in the DIY kind of space.
Yeah, have you thought about the disturbing and the violence?
Yeah, in what terms? Like
how that might emerge, or how have you seen it emerge? So like, for example, I feel like there's a few parallels in especially gaming, with this. And, you know, there's violent games and how often people will see them as cathartic.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, are people using these AI chatbots in violent ways? And how might that shift things?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like another generation of a debate that's happened many times before. And maybe the most recently relevant one that I can think of is all the kind of like the role playing that people were doing within early computer games, you know, but with the difference that there was a lot of role playing and a lot of it was also erotic or, you know, dating sims or, you know, more or less explicit, but still a lot of it was in that space. The difference was that you'd be interacting with another human on the other end. So they might be pretending, or they might be dressed up like a, I don't know, sexualized jellyfish or something. But, it would be an encounter with another person. Whereas now a lot of the same things are happening, and a lot of the same themes are coming up, but with the difference being that you're not dealing with another human.
You have to think about another perspective.
Yeah. But I mean, this is, did you ever come across a play called The Nether?
No.
I just think I can't remember the playwright, but it's absolutely brilliant. And it was on in London in the West End a few years ago now. And it proposes this, the Nether is a kind of an online space where, in this instance, pedophiles are coming into this imaginary space and they're play acting out their scenarios, but with other pedophiles as consenting adults taking the different roles.
Oh.
So the scenarios are completely, disturbing and everything, but the actuality of it is that it's fantasy play between consenting adults. So half of the play is happening within that set, and the other half of the play is happening in an interrogation room where these future police people are interrogating them about the meaning of this, and and
so all of these pedophiles are playing all the roles. So the children and the
exactly. So there are no actual children involved, but there's representations of children.
They're stepping into those roles.
Yeah. And I guess I don't have an easy answer to those things, because I do think that there is, as we touched on to start with, I think that real humans are open to representational damage through, through representations of their own, or use of their own likeness, let's say. And I think that's something that, again, it's like, it feels like an unknown still exactly how that's going to play out. But, all of that has just become much more, all the ways in which we can be impacted like that has just been kind of vastly rolled out, So there's a whole new world of vulnerabilities that we all now have to this. But then on the other hand, there's a part of me that goes, well, if it's all imagination, then, I'm kind of, I'd be very slow to try and police what people, do with their imagination. Like, maybe that's the brilliance of it, is that anything, if it's between consenting adults and it, doesn't harm anybody in real life, then what a wonderful space to enact those kind of freedoms. But I guess the issues are where it impacts the real life and real humans in some way. And I don't know if there's an easy answer to that.
It's also about how we relate to our likeness. Like that was also part of the thinking when they were asking me to become this AI companion, right? I think that I, for however many reasons, don't have as integrated a relationship to what I look like, what I sound like, my human form.
Yeah.
I think that I'm not sure why that's the case, but it's probably been heightened a lot by my meditation practice also. Like, I kind of see it as a form that kind of carries me around and that I can be through, but it's not necessarily me, you know? And so I think that when they're taking me and they're making it into this thing, I think I had maybe less friction around that also, because I feel like I am already something that's just a representation, and somebody's just making another one. So, but I know now, and in general, just from living, that I have a different relationship to my form than other people do. And maybe as the power gets taken away from us in terms of how much ownership we can have over our form, maybe that will change for other people too.
Yeah, I feel like what you're describing in a way is something that I suspect that most women on some level are subject to. I resonate with what you're saying in my own life experience as well. Like, I feel very I don't feel very closely associated with my own representation either. But then I've also had parts of my life where, not in the same way as you, but where it's still been, you know, something about the work that I've done has made it kind of necessary to think in terms of, to both be, you know, aware of myself as subject and object in a way. And you know, there's some interesting feminist scholarship about those kinds of things. We you know, on a level we are more closely associated with, we're both more impacted by, but also can more easily capitalize on our own images as well. And I think that's another kind of that's another sort of distinction somehow, is like whether we can benefit from, you know, there's a Angela Carter, who's one of my favorite authors, but also the feminists, and did interesting scholarship around the sort of earlier sort of feminist porn debates. Talks about that kind of like the I guess whether or not, how we're positioned to benefit from our own sexual capital somehow. And there's loads of taboos around that. And yet it's so obvious in the media landscape and online world and whatever that there's a logic by which the kind of economically virtuous woman would self-exploit her own sexuality and her own visual representation, and that in some way you're kind of like a virtuous fool if other people can just, you know, if you share your sexy selfies for free, then you are kind of like you're giving it away, and you are still shouldering the burden of what it means to be a woman, safeguarding her image in these kind of safeguarding her sexual capital, but you're not actually benefiting from it in a way. So by virtue, you know, but by extension, which you go like, there's a logic by which somehow we're all kind of dealing with some of the logic that plays out with sex work, even if we're not actively engaged in it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess then it's also about understanding the transactional nature of any interaction.
Right.
And how that can sometimes be around capital in a monetary form, or capital in wanting attention. Right. Or how that reflects back on what you think about yourself. And I mean, I think sex work really taught me that. And sure, I am on the receiving end of money, but it taught me about when I'm not getting paid, what am I getting? Yeah. Maybe I am going to send something sexy for free, but it's not free because I'm getting the attention of somebody that I actually want the attention from. That's their payment to me. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that makes it more transactional potentially, or makes your awareness of the transactional aspects of interaction more keen than maybe somebody who's not. Yeah, who hasn't experienced, here's an exchange. Hang on, wait, is everything an exchange? What am I doing with my off time now? Yeah. Because my time costs this much. Right. So is it worth that much? Yeah. And I mean, it's, you know, I mean, one of the aspects of this kind of new technology and the accessibility of it is that, you know, if there's any pictures of us online, we can't stop anybody from, you know, if you have a vengeful ex-boyfriend or a creepy fan or whatever, you know, you can be the most private woman if you have any social media or any pictures of you, even from like on LinkedIn or whatever hell, you can't stop somebody. You know, you have no control over how they use that. I mean, you ultimately never did. You know, you don't know which like work photos ended up in somebody's wank bank. You know, that was always the case, but now it has this added kind of, I guess, potential for them to give greater sort of body to it, I guess, you know, and build more of a relationship or parasocial relationship with your image without you having any control of it, you know. Yeah. And then I mean, this is almost a different podcast, but like episode, but I also think about how that also needs to be thought about. But I guess like ultimately, there's so much potential to anything that any of us bother with, whether it's in designing AI chatbots, whether it's in designing robot companions, maybe even, or whatever decisions that we end up making. But everything I always come back to, maybe it's like an easy way out and I'm looking for some sort of solution to soothe my anxieties or whatever. But I feel like if as long as we can have conversations around it, as long as we're being self-critical around ourselves and how we're all interacting, maybe it's just almost like a carte blanche sort of scenario that needs to happen, at least initially.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we kind of don't know what people are going to do. It's at that stage where it's sort of playing out, and we're
can it be parallel to anything else in history?
I mean, I think the early internet, it's just like another, the early internet was wild, wild west, and there is that kind of like radical freedom of the internet kind of, and the places, as I was talking about, where people are doing their DIY bots and everything, feels very like that, or even like the, even the online like social media forums for people using generative image engines and this kind of stuff. I'm in a few spaces like that, and it's interesting how fast it went from like, I guess, you could maybe predict it, but it's still something that you're kind of seeing in real time, where it's gone from a quite wide range of different applications to basically being, if 300 images are shared every day, then probably 280 of them are like idealized, physically impossible fantasy waifus, to the specific personalized taste of whoever, and everybody's sharing tips on like how to get them to be more or less nude without saying that, and how to get around the filters and everything. And all the women are disappearing out of these groups, as well. So I don't know. It has a logic to it. It does feel like it has a precedent.
Yeah.
I'm not a great fan of regulation, especially when it comes to imagination.
Yeah.
But I think that a greater literacy about this stuff, and maybe also something about like good form. The way, like, in a sense, like what's socially acceptable. And where the boundaries are in that, like, where's the delineation between fantasy, how you deal with your fantasy enactment with your chatbot versus what is and isn't permissible for you to do in real life, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, just a little bit more self-reflection.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's a nice spot to close. Or did you have anything else that kind of comes to mind?
No, I mean, look, there's so much we could talk about. So it feels so wide-ranging. There's so many, and it's brilliant to...
Yeah, it's just a part 2. I think I'm going to have a little series of this.
Fantastic.
So maybe I'll come back to your sofa.
That would
and
be
you'll
fun.
be much bigger, little cat.
Yeah, maybe we'll have some insights from actually implementing this project as well.
Yeah, and life and all the trouble all of us are getting ourselves into. I don't know whether I look forward to it. I'm intrigued.
I
leave
mean,
it at that.
In a way, we didn't go so much into where this is at for you at the moment. With the, do you want to go into that, or
I'm going to let it settle.
Okay,
but I think I gave little hints.
Yes,
it didn't go well. Now it's all right.
Well, what you're saying about the motivations of your new collaborators on this sounds pretty interesting.
It sounds more aligned to what I would be able to live with longer term in my conscience.
Yeah.
Although I'm totally not opposed to having my bath goal financial stability thing either,
Yeah, of course.
So it could have been 2 projects. Yeah. It could have been 2 projects. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful, and I must watch that play that you mentioned. The Nether?
The Nether.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely to meet you.
Thank you for listening. See you next time.